I honestly didn't expect us to be the only people here right now. I kind of thought other people would be here.
I mean, I'm assuming other people will be here soon. I also like how it instantly starts recording.
Oh, wow. I'd be on best behavior. I didn't even get the pop-up saying this meeting is being recorded.
Yeah,
I know, I didn't either. It's sort of surprising.
I wouldn't have noticed until you said something. There's a mom in probably Germany. At least the background looked like Germany.
Huh?
Your picture, your static picture.
It is in Germany, yes.
I couldn't pinpoint where. Might be Berlin, but
It is outside of Berlin. So it's not Susi.
Wow, you have a really good eye, Birdrock, for
Someone's been playing GeoGuessr.
well, the last time we could travel on a CF summit, when it was in the Netherlands, I then took 2 weeks in Germany. So it's the most recent country I visited.
Hello from Germany.
Hey, Baron.
Hello.
Yeah, once we get this travel started again, I want to go back. I had a great time.
Me too. Back to Germany.
I mean, it wasn't really good for like me diet wise because it was a steady stream of like Rennenschroden, Schnitzel, bratwurst, and like various beer. So I'm sure any medical professional would be like, yeah, don't go back. But man, was it tasty.
Yeah, I miss those European summits a lot. That was a nice thing to have at least once a year.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Soon.
2022.
Yeah. Okay, I guess we should maybe wait another minute or so. See if there's additional people joining. Otherwise, Eric, you suggested the topic, so.
Yeah, I was volunteering some of the other folks on the call. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I know we've been talking about the vision for CF on Kate stock. I think we finished making a pass through it. So there's probably some background work that we could be doing to resolve some of the comments there and capture some of the additional context that we generated, so that it's not all hidden in the comments. But I thought we'd be at a good stage now where we could also start talking about some potential options around the architecture and how that might fit into usage of what we've had in mind with CF for CF on Kates, and how that might or might not align to what's already there with CF for Kates and sit alongside kubecf. So I know that some of the folks that we've got here from VMware have been thinking about various options, and so whatever they think would be useful to illustrate or discuss at this point, I think would be great.
Good.
cool. Yeah, so I think there's maybe jumping in here, like sometimes it's hard to talk about things without having like diagrams or pictures, especially when you talk about architecture. And so I think like one thing that we have been thinking of like at a high level is, when we think about like sort of the work that was being done on CF for Kates, like I think one of the areas that we were trying to align towards was having more modular interfaces. And that's sort of in line with what we've been talking about in the CF on Kate's vision statement. And I think like one thing that like instantly comes to mind is like what the work that was being done around like having route CRDs and then being able to like use that as an interface to then like plug in different backing implementations for like what you wanted your ingress solution to be. And so I think, looking at all of the different sort of goals in the vision doc, it's definitely not I think one of the key callouts is like, it's not necessarily like a one size fits all solution, right? We want to really make it so that it's able to be pluggable. So if you really care about backwards compatibility.
Oh yeah, there we go. Great.
Okay, there we go. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, so like, I think like here, this, yeah. Yeah, this calls out sort of what's currently here, but I think like what's not called out necessarily is that level deeper of like, how are we actually using like each of these different like Kate solutions, right? So like, how are we actually using Istio? How are we actually using Pacato? And so I think the key to that really is having custom resource definitions, like custom resources as the interface to make it so that it's more pluggable of different solutions. And I think like particularly like we have been thinking about like, what would that look like, for example, like with a CF push like workflow, like, you know, what, like right now when you do a CF push, you know, you get a lot of different, like, you have a lot of different API calls to CAPI, and a lot of different resources are created. And so like, what resources would we actually maybe want to map to like Kubernetes resources? And how would that look? And so I don't know, I think, you know, Tim put together this diagram. I don't know, Tim, if you want to sort of like go through maybe thinking about like, or showing like the workflow for like one possible approach at like a high level for thinking about like custom resources, or if you'd like me to go through it.
No, I can totally go through it. Here, I can I'll share my screen. Here, actually, let me pull it to a new window so I don't have 100 tabs at the top. All right. Cool. Is it sharing? It doesn't show me the border. Let me try again. All right. This looks
There we go.
better.
Yep. Good.
Cool. Yeah, so this this little exploration we did like combines this like CRD interface approach also with like a thought experiment for trying to eliminate the cloud controller's database so that we have a single source of truth for where we're maintaining state. So we're imagining like a lightweight like re-implementation of the CFv3 APIs that's like backed entirely by CRDs. And for simplicity's sake, we've basically made a one-to-one mapping of custom resource and CAPI API resource, just because it makes the modeling easier to understand for how these might power an endpoint. So on this mirror board, we start out with a user using just a like vanilla CF CLI. It's not aware it's targeting something different because we've implemented the same API contract, and it is they are pushing in their app and applying a CF manifest, and that we have like a manifest controller. We've modeled this as separate controllers, but in practice, it could all be a single CF controller with multiple reconciler loops that watches that manifest and breaks down all the pieces of it into separate like route CRs, process CRs, and an app CR. And like I said, these are all like kind of like placeholders. Like you could imagine, instead of a process CR, it directly makes an Irene LRP CR, perhaps. That's all like an implementation detail, but hopefully this is like showing a bit of how this might work. And then because the v3 API calls are so granular, we kind of have to like jump through some hoops when we're doing this. So like, because an existing client expects to hit like 4 or 5 different API endpoints to push a package and stage an app. having these individual custom resources for different things, like having a discrete package CR makes it so that we can like track the same sort of cycle on the CP as the client might expect. So like here, the CLI uploads like a zip with the package source code as usual, but then instead of doing like the normal like blob store and resource matching flow that existing cloud controller would do, it's going to convert it into a zip file, or it's going to convert it into a single layer OCI image, kind of like we do in CF for K8s, and track all that on that package CR so that our API can convert it back into the states that the CLI might expect. Then eventually end up in an image registry. Like that part is pretty similar to what goes on in CF for K8s. And then like as you can see here, we will have build resources and droplet resources to power those endpoints. And these, like in this diagram, it kind of is similar to how we've done it in CF for K8s, but you could imagine this being like, yeah, like even another extension point where because our lightweight API only cares about the direct like build and droplet resources, like you could imagine a more like pluggable staging implementation here where you like swap out the build controller to create like I'm just throwing out words here, but like tecton stagers or like something else. So this is where we're like kind of viewing like opportunities for extension points just by granularizing these a bit. And then at the end of the day, once you have a staged droplet or image, whatever you want to call it these days, we'll do the bookkeeping, update the custom resources so that the API shim can return responses that the clients like CLI, Java client, etc. Expect, and it will deploy very, very similar to how it does in CF for K8s, but without a database or a lot of the rest of the like constellation of cloud controller deployments running. So like we're hoping that this will be a lighter weight and more like friendlier implementation for people to experiment and stuff. Yeah, so I've been talking a lot. Let's let folks ask some questions or anything.
I think from my perspective, like the whole topic of decoupling via CRDs makes total sense. Like given that things are running on Kubernetes, that seems to be like the de facto way of building APIs, right? And then like it's easy to envision how one could then kind of swap out one implementation of a controller that listens to the creation of a particular custom resource and kind of do something very different if that is required, right? So yeah, I think that's like very like a very good way of approaching things. I guess where I don't have a feel is what should these objects actually be, right? And I think you spent quite some thinking already into like what granularity could these be? How would you kind of represent things? So this package CRD seems to like come from that, right? So and I think that's very valuable to actually spend the time thinking through this and kind of coming up with suggestions on how those custom resources should actually be scoped and designed.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Like there's a lot of complexity with the number of these things, and not all of them are strictly necessary. Like for example, you could collapse like the build custom resource and the droplet custom resource into a single one. Like the droplet could be like the actual like the status of that resource, for example. But like others like the package, at a surface glance, they seem like they could be unnecessary, but like over here, we've done a deep dive into like all the calls like the CLI makes when it's interacting with the package. And there's like so many like polling calls and like looking for state of a thing that you see like, yeah, having a discrete thing for this is actually really useful. But yeah, but like I said, like this is like for illustration purposes, I think as we actually would like start to spike or like implement something based on this, we'd find opportunities to really like hammer or like dive in on what the right abstraction is that can like meet our needs, but also not be like super complicated. Because like one other complexity here is in Cloud Controller today, like these are all tracked in a relational database, and you have like strict relationships between them all. That's easy to work with. But these all are still related, but we lose the strict like foreign keys and everything. So there probably is some value of combining them just for atomicity and that sort of thing.
And from your perspective, like I recall discussions around, in an ideal world, one would be able to kind of either use the CLI or directly create and manipulate custom resources. Are some of those like just there for that CLI use case, or do you think like everybody would kind of create also these custom resource types, so to speak, if they would directly interact with or via the Kubernetes CLI?
Yeah, that's a good question. Like my hope is that people who want to interact directly like may use a higher level like resource that we'd have, like either like an app manifest one or some equivalent that's more along the app side. And I don't know. It's a tricky question, because if you skip intermediary resources, then you may break the API for users who want to interact with that app with traditional CF clients. So like if you were doing pure kubectl like CR manipulation, you could totally probably skip like the package and just give it an image directly at like the droplet creation state. But I'm not sure how that might look for the API. It might be fine. It like, because a lot of those resources have like built-in like pruning and expiration anyway in CF today. But yeah, getting like validation of those workflows would be totally be useful.
Yeah, I think like the nice thing about this or like about what is highlighted here is like by having the custom resources as like the source of truth, like unlike all of the previous like CF for K8s like and CF on K8s projects, like it allows you the ability to like directly manipulate these like custom resources if you want and have like direct kubectl access. But I think like to the point of like, do we like, there is an open question of like, what would we sort of want to set up as like expectations for like the user on like what they want to manipulate and what they don't? Because I think like also like similarly, when you look at like a lot of these diagrams and like we look at like what like some custom resources might actually drive the like creation or update of like other custom resources. Like you have controllers that are like actuating and like updating status fields or like information on it. Like I think, you know, part of that also then is like, what is the expectation on the like ownership references, right? Like, is the controller actually owning the update of that object? And so if somebody tries to go in and like manually make a change, will that be clobbered or not? So I think like we're going to have to do exploration on like what do end users actually want to be able to manipulate, and like how can we like make it so that, you know, maybe they can use the API or the CLI to initially set up all of their resources, and then they're like, oh, I want finer grain control. Is there like a flag or a switch where they can say this is no longer going to be managed by like the CF by like the CF like workflow, and instead like I I want to go in and like manually do some changes, and I'm trading off now the fact that I don't get all of the benefits of like this system, like watching out for it.
Yeah, also in my mind, it's probably this trade-off of like, do you want to have a system that works optimally well with like the CLI, or do you want to have a system which looks and feels nice if you look at it from a pure Kubernetes perspective, right? So you have to kind of somewhere make that trade-off between those two extremes, probably.
Yeah.
So just a random aside thought. In this scenario, basically everything that used to be in CCDB is now in etcd as some CRs. Is there any scenario where CCDB would live on as like a caching layer for logging metrics or something, like moving the source of truth to etcd, but does CCDB still exist somehow or something similar?
I think this is where you get like, I think you could have a world where you could have like caching, but I think that gets at like the cost benefit of like, how do you actually set up like caching? Like what is the benefit of like, you know, keeping a relational database around for that like usage versus like, yeah, like the engineering costs to just like make that happen, and then the sustained like implementation like cost as well.
Yeah, makes sense. I guess maybe the root of the more concerned question is, what is the difference in like Kubernetes API load in the new world versus the current world? Is it lighter or heavier? What do you think?
It would definitely be heavier with this. An open question I have is how much can we like leverage like just like in-memory caching on some of these controllers to mitigate that? But the fact is like we are like pushing stuff that used to be in like a highly performant like MySQL or Postgres onto etcd, and it's not going to perform to the same scale that like CF for VMs used to, but maybe that's okay, like because already like we've observed that like a single Kubernetes cluster like doesn't run the same amount of workloads or anything as like how you could scale Diego's cells to like 300 plus cells, and that like various like cluster sharding approaches and stuff can be a mitigation there as well potentially. But.
Cool, thanks for the answer.
Tim, I find the idea of having like an app manifest CR really interesting. Is that already an existing resource that CC tracks as part of like the server-side manifest apply?
It is I'd call it like a pseudo resource. So it you apply a manifest and you can get one back out, but there's nothing in the database about like call to manifest, and it's just constructed by these various other tables as needed. And it's also like may not be strictly necessary for this design. We just felt it was interesting because it would provide like a one-stop CR for someone to like declare their app and apply it.
Yeah, I was thinking that could actually be a nice feature that would be user-facing for people that would end up just using the CRs in the K8s API.
Yeah, I think like when I had first seen this, I was like, why like, why would we want an app manifest CR? And like the main call out really was like, oh, it does provide like, you know, that nice like, well, it sort of makes this like the API, like at least like for that call could be like very straightforward, but also creates that nice interface for like somebody who maybe is like more comfortable with like core Kubernetes concepts to just directly go ahead and like modify the app manifest CR than like feel like they have to use the CLI or API.
Yeah, like, and for me, like one of the really nice things about it is like if you have an existing Cloud Foundry with an existing app deployed, but you don't know much about how that app is configured, you can hit the generate manifest endpoint and it will dump everything out about it. And like it'd be really cool if you can just apply that or something similar to that to directly to one of these and see it deploy the same thing. With the caveat that you may need to still have the source code or download the droplet and convert it or something. But
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess there is still that issue of like, okay, where are the bits? You know, are they in an image? Are
I
they
was
in
just about to
in a
ask.
repo somewhere? You know, did you cram them into this degenerate OCI image?
yeah, if you you can imagine like if you have permission to get the manifest, you can download the droplet and convert it if you wanted to. But
Yeah, that's a good point. Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's always the possibility it lives in a repo and you can have it fetched from there and stuff like that too.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of like a GitOps model for deploying apps to a cluster.
So Tim, in the diagram of resources that you've got there, like there's those process CRs. With those, maybe like if we were to actually try to make this get realized end to end today, like I'm guessing that Irene would fit underneath that as a way to implement that.
yeah, process CRs. This is like just a black box for application workload CRs. You with the information contained in these three, at least with this modeling, the app, the process, and the droplet CR, you can create an Irene LRP. You could create like a Knative service. You can do what you want with it. And like these, this could be collapsed. Maybe it's a little iffier because like in CF, an app can have multiple processes, and since those correspond one-to-one with LRPs and stuff, it you could combine this into a single thing, but the bookkeeping gets a little trickier, and for the sake of just the diagram, it's cleaner if you do it like this.
Yeah, I think like maybe one interesting call out, like, or like what you just called out, like with this being a black box is really important, of like, just because like the CF process controller like is something that could be swapped out and be creating like could be directly creating like resources or like application workloads, but just as easily, like you said, like could be like actually creating like an Irene LRP CR, and then you have like the Irene controller that is then like, you know, actuating on that and creating either stateful sets or deployments. Or you could like, instead of have a different CF process controller that creates like the Knative like resources. And then if you have Knative deployed on your cluster, then that could actually actuate and like create deployments for you. And so like this black box isn't just like a application workloads are created, but also like could represent like additional like resources and controllers that help you eventually like make it to a running workload.
Yeah, I've mentioned before that the Irene LRP resources are very much work in progress, right? So I think we should take that into account when designing these APIs. We can definitely change how the LRP resources look like to fit an interface that looks like this if we need to. or the other way around, we can use the LRP, the way the LRP resources look like, which has been informed from, basically been, it's a one-on-one port more or less of the REST resources which have been used for a long time. So that could be a way to, that could be a starting point to give you an idea of which information is needed to create a process. So, but I guess you have a process model on your side, but they must be looking quite similar, because otherwise nothing would work at the moment. So.
Yeah, this one is just for the powering of the APIs. It's convenient to have a discrete process model, just because that's where the desired like start and stop state of an LRP actually lives on the API. Because like for an app, all of its processes can be like mutated independently. But yeah, like you both have said though, like the line between this and the Irene LRP definitely gets fuzzy, and there may be value in having them be discrete things, or combining it, and maybe the Irene LRP becomes like you have controllers built off of that, and those can either be the Irene controller or like other ones, but there's a lot of like flexibility here.
Right. Yeah. I guess in terms of the interfaces that we've been discussing in the vision doc, like we could still end up having like the Irene LRP be the, that interface out to the subsystem potentially. Whereas, these green resources seem like they're much more closely aligned to the domain model that we've already had in Cloud Controller. And so they'd be somewhat more user facing. And I think to Baron's point, we could even have a model where end users are bypassing the CF-CLI entirely and just manipulating even those intermediate CRs in the K8s API.
And the Cloud Foundry API to Kubernetes shim box that's displayed here, this is like essentially that exposes a REST API, like the same REST API that Cloud Controller exposes, and then kind of starts generating the various custom resources, right?
Yeah, that's it. It's basically a V3, another implementation of the V3 API that we would like build iteratively, sorry, as we need, but it's backed completely by these. And I don't know if shim is necessarily the right word for it, but we've struggled to find what the right word is for it.
And just to be clear, like we've had it on kind of just we're not probably picking up the CC code base and manipulating it to produce that. This is probably just let's start re-implementing a subset of CC endpoints and whatever other services we would need.
Yeah. I think my thought is, could that work also somehow benefit the Bosch managed CF world? Like one thing which would be probably too ambitious would be to say, hey, let's introduce a Kubernetes API server instead of the Ruby-based Cloud Controller, right? Because that would kind of probably just trade one very huge piece of technology with another one. But like the pure fact that there is like a Cloud Foundry API or the subset of a Cloud Foundry API, could that also help in kind of slimming down the Bosch managed world? Obviously, it's not like it's not just a byproduct of like this work here, but I'm trying to think if like that at least might contribute to such an activity.
Have we decided that this is going to be like a brand new component, like made of all controllers for all these resources? I guess so. This would be distinct from the current cloud controller code base?
I think that's what we're discussing right now.
Okay.
We're,
Cool. So
yeah,
I
we're just
joined- I joined
thinking
late.
about this option.
Right.
I think like, I mean, based on, you know, what we're presenting right here, I at least like do see the benefit in it being something like new versus the existing like cloud controller code base. Mainly because I know like I think like like there's a question on like, you know, like having both the database and custom resources, like what is the source of truth? How do you keep that in sync? And then I think also when we talk about like thinking about what custom resources we want to create, you know, we're starting by thinking about like what are all of the objects that we store in the database today, and like what are all of these cloud controller concepts. But as like I think Tim mentioned earlier, and like we also discussed, was like how could we maybe slim down the number of custom resources we create, and like what could be combined, and what needs to like remain a distinct resource. And so I think that you also run into a challenge if you try to like evolve the existing cloud controller database to support both like CF for VMs and also like CF on K8s, because because you know there's an expectation on like what resources are being created when, and if you try to start to combine them, I anticipate you'd run into problems. And I think like also just generally like working on CF for K8s and making changes to cloud controller, like I think engineers on the team have found that to be a pain point. And so I think from an engineering cost perspective as well, it seems worth creating a new component and really opting into endpoints instead of like, and I think this gets to backwards compatibility too, of like, you might get these endpoints for free, but are they actually backwards compatible? We don't know, like we haven't tested it.
So is there a good understanding of which endpoints this would be? Like I've seen some confusion still around like what does it mean v3 is complete, and like does it still involve like v2 endpoints and all of that?
I'm guessing. Oh, go ahead.
I was
Yeah.
just gonna say, I think to start, we definitely start with targeting like the V7 CLI push workflow, which is primarily V3, and any like V2s that are required for that.
Okay.
But
yeah.
I don't know, Eric, were you gonna say more?
Yeah, I was gonna say like I thought it made sense to focus on what the V7 CLI is doing, and you know, as you just mentioned, Tim, there's a few places where that's still relying on V2 endpoints. I'm guessing that's probably not the case for some of those like app-centric workflows. I would kind of expect that to be all converted over to the V3 endpoints at this point.
Yeah,
Maybe
I think
some of the services stuff is still V2.
Yeah, that definitely resonates with me. I think it's mostly V3 at this point. And like one of the nice things about a new like component though is whether it's V2 or V3 at a certain point, that's just like what we present. And like we could do like a couple like V2 ones if we really needed to, without actually like taking on the complexity of working with the V2 code base or anything, because it is new. So that's convenient. But like I think we can get pretty far without doing any V2 at all.
Which actually brings me to the question of
obviously there's no such thing as like a service or a service binding or anything like that. At least not that I would have seen it. So the goal, I guess, for the initial investigation is to quote unquote just push an app that doesn't have any service dependencies, right? Or kind of inject those service dependencies in a different way, right?
Yeah, like this doesn't touch on that. We have thought about it a little bit, but it's, I don't know, we don't have any good like diagrams or anything of what that might look like. At the most basic level, you could imagine that services just get converted into a VCAP services environment variable block on the app for feature parity. But I think ideally we'd like to like have an abstraction there, like either it's like Kubernetes service bindings or cloud native service bindings, whatever that thing is called. But you could imagine like an initial implementation using the environment variables still.
Yeah, Tim, I think that's a really good point about wanting to get to that level of abstraction that's maybe commensurate with what we have in, I guess, probably the V3 CC API, where those are represented as distinct entities, and then we could keep projecting them as VCAP services. But I think also, as that Kate's service binding spec has been emerging, that's probably the direction that we'd want to steer everyone towards in terms of the actual runtime environment of the containers and the presentation of those service binding pieces of data.
Yeah, I think we've been focusing, like, as highlighted by like what we've been talking about so far in these diagrams, so much on like the CF push and just like main application workflow. But I think like it's definitely important to also be thinking about services, since most apps rely on that. And so like I think maybe that that's something that can be explored like in parallel to like trying to like really like nailing down and like starting to think about like what API endpoints to support for the application like workflow.
Yeah,
I wonder if a good starting point for that could even be like, what would even like a user provided service instance and a binding to that look like? Then we could probably get away without a lot of the complicated machinery that's currently in Cloud Controller that interacts with all of the actual service instance lifecycle management, and get to focus a little more narrowly on the binding part, which is going to be probably one of the most relevant pieces for that developer workflow. And then it certainly initially would like give people at least an avenue to be binding those services in a more structured way, even if the CF API to Kate's shim isn't handling all the rest of the service lifecycle.
Yeah, and those services are part of an app manifest. We have a Google Doc somewhere that has like a straw dog implementation of that, which I believe we just had it like create some Kubernetes secrets that would store the user provided service, and then they'd have a label or something binding them to the app, and it like at least conceptually made sense, but
it'll probably work.
Yeah, it'd be definitely good to have that actually drawn out.
Well, cool. This has been really great. Really appreciate getting this picture of what y'all have been thinking about for the last little bit.
Cool. I'm gonna stop sharing now.
I was wondering, had you thought at all about like user authentication and tenancy through these different layers yet?
All right, I'm gonna share again. There's some boxes over here. this part is definitely a little fuzzier, but we're thinking about how we can project like the org and space permissions hierarchy onto Kubernetes namespaces and RBAC and potentially other policy mechanisms. Like again, a direct like API mapping would have like an org and potentially a space CR, and like you could build out controllers that would look for these, and those would reconcile them and make the necessary namespaces and RBAC as you assigned user roles and stuff. But like you could also perhaps just like leverage namespaces directly and get fancy with labels, or use hierarchical namespaces once that's ready to do so. We haven't. I don't know. It would be nice to like spike out some of this probably and like flesh out this diagram some more, but this is how we're thinking about that problem. And like this, the existing RBAC will work well for things that operate like roles that are like, okay, you have full access to like this app because it is within a space you're a space developer on. And so if you are like in a namespace that corresponds with that space and you have RBAC that says you can like create and update that app, like that will work fine. It gets a little trickier if there are like permissions that affect a sub like field on a resource. One of those that I can think of is like app environment variables. Like certain roles can view everything about an app except its environment variables, for example. So like that either could still work in this if you just like modeled that as a separate resource maybe, or as like secrets and you don't have permission to view those secrets, or like we could use like open policy agent or something and get fancier and say, I don't know. I think there's a lot of options there, but we at least believe that if we can model get a namespace corresponding to a CF space, then we can do a lot of what we need to do.
Cool, that's great. Yeah, is there such a thing as a mutating presentation controller instead of an admission controller? These fields are redacted.
Yeah.
Yeah, great work.
Yeah, like to be honest, separating it out, like having your environment variables be a secret that's referenced by the app has a lot of benefits too, just because like assuming you set up your secrets right such that they're encrypted at rest and stuff, it's probably better you have that in a secret and not just floating as part of a app CR. So I think there's like stuff like just by virtue of doing things correctly, you can then just have your RBAC say like, no, you can't view secrets here, and you're good.
Yeah, I guess that maybe even gives kind of a finer, like at least maybe the opportunity for a finer distinction of granularity about like the confidentiality of any of that, because maybe some of those environment variables are genuinely just non-sensitive configuration. You're like, you know, it's actually fine for anyone to see this because it doesn't matter. It's just, you know, telling how many widgets per hour to make or something. And but some of those, you know, I think we have seen end up being more confidential configuration, whether that's, you know, some sort of authentication parameter to a service or something like that, that still needs to be encoded as an environment variable because it doesn't fit into the service binding model cleanly. And so, yeah, that's, I could see that being an interesting kind of representation of that distinction that we've made with the CF rules, where it's kind of still kind of brutal, where it's like, well, you don't see any of the environment if you're in this more limited scope.
Right.
I mean, obviously that could still be abused if you have any latitude to put just inline environment variables on the resource. People could still put something bad there, but could also still decide to publish their secret on GitHub in public, and it would be not recommended either.
Yeah, again, great stuff. I think that's very valuable to also share it here in this round.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks again for sharing and for putting all that together to give us all an overview. I know we've got a few minutes left on this call. Is there anything else folks wanted to bring up in the CF for Kates on Kates universe?
I mean, maybe like I haven't been able to make the last couple of sessions, so I don't know how we usually wrap up these meetings, but maybe given like I wouldn't want this to be the only like opportunity for folks like sort of like be able to give feedback or share like talk about like like the technical architecture, because that's highly critical. And so I think maybe like a question is like what do we think are the next steps to be making sure that we're publicizing this, getting feedback from folks, like really ensuring that we have alignment, because I think it's been really great to get alignment on the vision doc. But I know sometimes when you start to get into the weeds of implementation, that's when you discover maybe some like differences in like expectations. And so maybe like we can talk about like, what we think the next steps are, so that we get feedback, but we also keep making progress towards the shared vision.
Yeah, I mean, maybe some things that would be useful would be, I know we were talking pretty informally and just going over the Miro board. I don't know if it'd be reasonable to start publishing some things on CFDev just for wider broadcast and commentary. Maybe that's something that we could discuss over the next week or so. Because I think that is then getting to that next level of having some shared artifacts that would encourage that discussion and then alignment.
Maybe as a kind of more midterm topic, I'm also kind of putting quite some hopes in the to be established technical oversight committee. So I think like when we published the vision document, I came across people who like them basically said, where's that document? I didn't even see it. And so maybe like a more formal process as something where like things are more visible. So for example, people here were suggesting to say, can we have something like a GitHub repo where we would at least kind of open a GitHub issue that then points to these documents as kind of a formal pointer that allows people to subscribe to the repository to kind of keep informed about latest discussions and status. So I'm kind of hoping that like via establishing the TOC, such discussions could be also kind of tracked more formally in the future. But obviously, like what Eric said, for now, publishing the artifacts via CFDev is obviously the right thing to do.
Yeah,
I think that definitely makes sense in terms of some process that the forthcoming TOC should consider. And I think also if anyone is interested in, certainly everyone here should be eligible to vote in the TOC election. But if you're interested in serving on the TOC, then certainly if you're from VMware, talk to me and Angela. And I think the voting process that we have for the TOC seats doesn't mean that we need to be particularly coordinated in nominating those, but we probably don't also want to spam everyone with like dozens of names either.
well, I think
in
that
the meantime,
sounds like a good plan of sharing Gal.
Yeah, there is. I think it's been it hasn't been very widely publicized, but I think it's in the Cloud Foundry org at this point. There's a CFAR-proposals repo that people have used occasionally to try and track and coordinate some proposals via issues that are related to the CF app runtime. I'll drop a link into the chat. So
that was at least something I wasn't aware of. So
oh yeah. I will drop a link into that in chat for the folks here. It has not been heavily used, although I see Piali created an issue on it for some of the RBAC changes.
I gave it a star, so now it's
sweet. Thanks, Tim.
popular.
It's
Yeah.
appreciated. Well, we're well on our way to dominating GitHub mindshare.
It's trending.
All right. Well,
Okay.
yeah. Sounds good for next steps to be starting to put more thoughts about architectural options down on virtual paper and to be circulating them.
Yeah.
So
Okay. I'll point a couple of people here at SAP to the information as well.
fantastic. All right. Well, again, thanks.
Thank you very
Thanks for putting
much.
that all together.
Yep.
Really appreciate it.
Great.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you,
Bye.
everybody. Talk to you next time. Bye.